This isn't some one of those weird encounters you hear about. It's more like a whole district gradually figuring out that one man could be the cause of something terribly amiss. It started when I came to live in Willow Creek, a quiet, serene suburb on the outskirts of Portland. People kept to themselves, friendly in general, with a kind of charm you'd see on tree-lined suburban streets with maple trees and neat sidewalks. It was secure until Marcus arrived. Marcus had the most immaculate front yard anyone had ever seen. Deep, rich grass, so thick it looked like it was plastic, always immaculately groomed. Word was, he paid an outrageous sum to have a landscaping crew take care of it. But it wasn't the lawn that drew notice, it was Marcus himself. He had a terrible temper. I remember catching sight of him yelling at the landscapers, flailing his arms, red-faced and furious over something or another. No one said anything at the time. We just pushed it aside. Perhaps he was just fussy. But last summer, things went haywire. Marcus paid a kid from the block down the street, 17-year-old Eli, a neighborhood kid always eager to assist neighbors, to do a favor, keep an eye on his house while Marcus and his wife were gone for 2 weeks. It appeared to be an easy job at first. Water the plants, secure the doors and windows, but the directions Marcus gave were quirky. Eli told his parents that Marcus had written 2 full pages of instructions. The kid was asked to visit the house multiple times a day, turn certain lights on and off at certain times, and follow a set of odd, unnecessary instructions. He wasn't allowed to step onto the grass, not even the edges, and was asked to remove his shoes before crossing the concrete sidewalk. The oddest part? He couldn't go inside. Instead, he was told to flip the light switches with a stick with a loop on the end through the door. And watering the flowers? He had to use a little watering can, no hose allowed. The note even said Marcus would be watching, and that there would be pictures if Eli didn't follow the rules exactly. That's when Eli's parents stepped in and called Marcus. They told him they weren't okay with it anymore. They said they'd still keep an eye on the house, but Eli was out. Marcus didn't take it well. He came home from his holiday at dawn, and the first thing he did was storm around to their residence. He thumped on the door until they opened it up, trying to fight. Another neighbor, Mr. Halverson, who was a retired policeman, emerged when he heard the noise. He tried to calm Marcus down, but Marcus became enraged. He told them he'd let it go only if they let him bare-ass spank the boy. When they did not, he lost all composure. Things got only worse after that. A couple of weeks later, still another neighbor, Carl, ran into Marcus at the grocery store. Carl told us that Marcus cornered him in the freezer aisle and would not stop talking. It was not even usual small talk, just started blabbing on. He mentioned wives should not have friends. He went on and on about how his sister-in-law was so obese. She broke their toilet seat last time she visited. It was as if his filter was gone. And that's when people started paying attention to something about Marcus's wife, Claire. She was always the life of the party, always the one baking cookies for the community block parties or having little strolls through the garden. But now, no one saw her anymore. You'd see her out watering every now and again, but that was it. She never had a word, never smiled, just quiet, like a machine. It creeped people out. And then winter came. One day, there was a flyer in each mailbox in the neighborhood. It was Marcus's landscaping company. There was a note stuck to it, written in Marcus's handwriting, that said it was now mandatory for each home in Willow Creek to use that same company. He said that anyone who did not would be sued. The thing is, we don't have a homeowners association. His note was pure hogwash, but it was sent to each home. Shortly thereafter, someone saw Claire outside again. Her arm was in a sling, and her face was bruised so severely that it couldn't be ignored. A neighbor stopped by to check on her, but Marcus ran out and intercepted them. He said she slipped on the ice and fell. Claire didn't respond, just stood there, looking at the ground. A few of us tried to speak to her in private afterward, but Marcus never left her alone. A few of us even reported it to the local church and the police, and asked them to do a welfare check when Marcus was away from home, but Claire just kept on refusing assistance. By this time, we were all on high alert. That was a bad winter, snow each week. The city plows dumped it at the end of Marcus's driveway like they did for all the rest of us, but Marcus lost his mind. One day, he spilled a bunch of screws onto the street in front of his house, just threw them out like confetti, probably hoping to destroy the plow tires. A couple of cars got flat tires that week. Early in spring, somebody a few blocks away got a new puppy. Cute little thing, quiet. Always stayed within the fenced backyard. One night, around 2 o'clock, their doorbell rang. The owner stepped out to find Marcus on the street just outside their yard. He told them the first time the dog ran away, they wouldn't have a dog anymore. Then he pulled a gun out of his belt and waved it around before pointing it towards the backyard and saying bang. They entered the house and called the police. When police came, Marcus said he was out for a walk. He said he thought they were up and came over to visit. Admitted having the gun but said it was still on his belt. Claimed he did not say the words with intent to threaten him. Got a citation, but that was all. Now that the weather's warmer, he started sitting outside on his porch with a notebook. Every time someone walks by or even drives by, he starts writing. No one knows what it's about, but I've started taking the long way home just to avoid passing his house. Most recently, a neighbor put up a swing set in their yard for their kids. One afternoon, they came home from work to find tire tracks through the lawn. The swing set? Broken, totally smashed. No one saw anything, but the tire tracks were identical to those on Marcus's big truck. Mr. Halverson, the former police officer, has begun taking down statements. He's getting statements from everyone in the neighborhood. Dates, times, what was said, what was done. No one has any idea where this is going to go, but all of us feel the same way. Something bad is going to happen. It was a lazy Thursday night in early September that it all happened. My boyfriend Ethan and I were curled up on the sofa, half watching a movie in the lounge. I was 8 months pregnant, and being seated without pain was a small win. Our 2 kids, Ava and Miles, 5 and 7, were already asleep and tucked away in their bedroom down the hallway. We live in a small 2-bedroom apartment in a quiet suburb of New Haven, Connecticut. Nothing dramatic ever really happens here, until that night. At 10, there was a knock at the front door. Not hard or insistent, just a single knock. Ethan glanced over at me, paused the movie, and stood up to go peer out the window. I stayed on the couch, rubbing my distended belly. Then he returned and said it was Martin. Martin was a guy we'd met a few months earlier that summer. He lived a few houses down, maybe late 50s or early 60s. We'd installed some kitchen flooring for him, and we'd waved or spoken briefly here and there afterwards. He'd never seemed to be dangerous, maybe a bit eccentric. I remembered that he'd once said something quite matter-of-factly about dealing weed and having pounds of it just lying around in his car, but it had come across as more of a boast than anything. We just laughed it off. That was Martin. Strange, but in an almost endearing manner. So when Ethan answered the door that night, we weren't expecting any trouble. But no sooner did the door open than Martin simply walked on in without being invited. I sat up a little straighter, already feeling uneasy. He didn't say anything at first, just walked on into our small kitchen and plopped down heavily in the chair that was right next to the doorway to the hall that led to the kids' room. That's when I saw it. From where I was sitting, I could clearly see under his slightly too large sweatshirt. In the waistband of his jeans was stuck a massive hunting knife. And right beside it, barely concealed, was a wooden baseball bat. My heart skipped a beat. My mouth went dry. Ethan hadn't seen the weapons. He was just standing opposite him at the table, trying to figure out why Martin had shown up uninvited in the middle of the night. Ethan asked if he was okay or if he needed help, but Martin wasn't calm. He started ranting almost immediately, his voice sharp, erratic. He said something about how the people at his house were angry. He was upset about the flooring we'd helped him with a few months back, saying it wasn't finished properly and that Ethan had to come fix it right then and there or else. I wasn't sure what he meant by the people in his house. As far as we knew, he lived alone. Then it escalated. He started talking about my kids, saying their names, saying things that were too specific, too personal. I tried to step in and told him the kids were sleeping and Ethan wasn't going anywhere. But Martin wouldn't let up. He got more agitated, his voice rising. Ethan could tell things were getting out of hand even though he still had no clue Martin was armed. Trying to placate him, Ethan stood up and said he'd go with him, to humor him, just to get Martin back out the door. The idea was to get him outside and then lock the door behind him. They both headed for the front door. Ethan tossed me a reassuring look, I think to let me know it was going to be okay. But the moment he turned his head, Martin shoved him hard. Harder than I thought a man his age could manage. Ethan stumbled forward into the doorway, and Martin slammed the door shut behind him. Suddenly, I was alone in the house. 8 months pregnant, completely stunned, and terrified. I grabbed my phone and called 911. The operator told me to get outside, but I was frozen. I couldn't imagine going out there with an unstable, armed individual a few feet away. But I forced myself to walk out onto the deck. It was silent, too silent. No Ethan to be seen, no screams, no pounding footsteps. It hadn't even been a minute. I just stood there, my heart pounding, helpless. The dispatcher was still questioning me, but I barely listened. Abruptly, out of nowhere, someone was banging on the door. I turned, and there was Ethan, standing there, eyes wide, axe in hand. He ran in, gasping and shaking. Both the dispatcher and I were trying to make sense of what the hell had happened. Ethan was finally able to stammer out that the moment they reached the street, Martin had pulled out the knife and started yelling about cutting your head off for the people at my house. Ethan didn't wait to find out what that was meant to signify. He ran across people's front lawns, over fences, and at some point, grabbing an axe from someone's backyard. The police arrived a little while later, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. We were living in a cul-de-sac on the outskirts of St. John, New Brunswick at the time. They took our statements, and we were told there would be a court date. We went to the courthouse weeks later but never even made it inside. Someone came out and told us it was finished. We found out Martin was there too, in a suit that was too large for him, standing out like he didn't belong. That part bothered me more than I thought it would. He still lived in the same neighborhood. My kids rode the school bus home a few feet from where he walked by every single day. Nobody ever told us if he was actually charged or what happened after that. All we knew was that he was out the next day. We didn't wait around to see what would happen next. We moved. Even now, months later, in another home far away from that cul-de-sac, I catch myself still asking how quickly it all did happen. How easily someone apparently harmless could just stroll into your life and tear your sense of security apart, and how close we came to something much worse. My name is Emily, a 27-year-old woman living in a quiet suburb of Melbourne in Australia. I've been suffering from panic disorder for over a year now. It's an illness that fills me with overwhelming anxiety and panic attacks and makes everyday life a challenge. I married my husband Daniel just over a year ago. Unfortunately, around the time of our wedding, I began to develop unexplained health issues. Panic attacks that recurred saw me in the emergency room, where I was often sedated to calm down. My weight dropped rapidly, and my overall health deteriorated. I lost my job and was confined at home in our house in under a month of our marriage. Daniel worked late hours, 4 p.m. to 3 a.m., so most nights I was alone. My parents and younger brother lived about a 10-minute drive from me but were limited by their work schedules to see me on a regular basis. In May, doctors informed me that my condition was critical. I was prescribed medication to manage the panic attacks and regain my appetite. I was recommended to be hospitalized, but I declined. My parents invited me to go with them on a trip to Queensland the following month, hoping the change of scenery would help. Around this time, issues with the neighbors began. We had not met them personally, but Daniel told me that they seemed odd. The previous resident of our home was a distant relative of mine who had a reputation for selling drugs. We moved in after she had been arrested, but it seemed like the neighbors believed she had returned. They started acting weird, especially at night. They would drive past our house, pause in front of it, and honk their horn. I ignored them, hoping they would realize that another person was living here now, but they took it up a notch. They began to drive up our driveway and stop near the porch. I phoned the police, but they said that they could not do anything unless the neighbors entered our property. They advised me to leave the house lights on as a sign of occupancy. Sleep was impossible. I had mononucleosis and depression, and the lack of sleep made me even more ill. Strangely, the noise from the neighbors ceased on weekends when Daniel was home. Daniel's father, being concerned for my health, lent me a shotgun to protect myself, as he was aware that I was a shooting sports veteran. That night, while Daniel was at work, I finally dozed off to sleep, only to be awakened at around 1 a.m. by the sound of a car screeching as it sped from our driveway. I went out and found tire tracks on our lawn. The neighbors were driving back and forth in front of our house. I called the police and my dad, and he came immediately. Daniel came home immediately after hearing. Despite the evidence, the police couldn't do anything for lack of conclusive evidence. A week before our planned trip to Queensland, I managed to attend my older brother's wedding as a bridesmaid, heavily medicated so as not to have panic attacks. I remember nothing of the day apart from the deluge of rain. I was alone at home that night with our 2 cats, playing a portable game with the television on for background noise. Around midnight, the cats became agitated, running back and forth from the side to the front doors, hissing and snarling. This was new behavior for them. I stood up to investigate what was happening and heard people outside discussing how they would enter the house. The sound of footsteps followed along the porch. I was scared and called my dad and said that someone was trying to break in. He told me to call the police and that he was on his way. I grabbed the shotgun, made sure it was loaded, and called the police. I stood there in the dark, gun pointed at the door, trying not to have a panic attack and trying to calm my breathing. The dispatcher stayed on the line with me, informing me that help was on the way. I heard the intruders mention that I was armed, after which there was silence. I then saw my father's truck arriving. He and my younger brother, both armed, came to join me. The police soon arrived after that. We unarmed ourselves as instructed. The police found footprints and signs of attempted entry, but the intruders had fled. There was a clue to lead us to the neighbors, which was corroborated by our landlords and other individuals who had issues with them. My father and brother were outside, screaming threats at the neighbors, warning them to leave me alone. I noticed my father crying, which I had rarely witnessed previously. He afterward informed me he feared he would not be in time to rescue me. That night, Daniel returned home and hugged me tightly, thankful that I was fine. A week after that, the whole family and I traveled to Queensland. Slowly, my health improved. Our neighbors never bothered us again. I don't know whether it was the police visit, the confrontation from my family, or simply the fact that those neighbors realized I was no longer afraid to stand up for myself. But I was not going to be a victim any longer.